welcome to today's episode of Chairman's Chat. I'm Derek Brown, Chairman of the Utah Republican Party, and we do this series of chats to talk with candidates, usually, except for today. Today's a little different. We're going to do, I think this is the one and only time we're going to do this. We're going to talk with someone who's here and is an expert on an issue that everyone's really talking about. So we have Brent Jex, who is with us. You're with you're the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, correct? Do you want to just start by just saying what that is? What is it that the Fraternal Order of the Police do? Because I know a lot of people have heard about FOP. They just don't know kind of what do you do?
So we're the largest labor organization in the state. We represent over 4,300 police officers. Nationally, the FOP is the oldest and largest law enforcement organization with over 360,000 members. And we basically advocate for conditions of police officers and their families and things that affect them.
That's great. That's great. I mean, it's an important issue, and really it's timely because we have a lot of people that are sort of talking about these issues. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this is because a lot of people are talking about law enforcement issues and justice, and they're talking about sort of how does this impact society. And we see a lot on the media by a lot of people who think they know what they're talking about. And a lot of, I mean, just as we have all these homegrown experts in epidemiology, the last couple months, we have all these experts now on law enforcement and justice and things like, police tactics and that sort of thing. But rarely do we see anyone who actually has the real inside scoop. And so this, you've served, you've taught at the police academy, you get this sort of thing. And so what is it that, let me start by asking this. What is it that we're missing in the debate?
Context. And context is such an important part. Take a scenario where video gets released, whether it's dash cam video or body cam video.
And that's a new thing as well for the last 5 or 10 years that we're seeing. Right. We're seeing video footage of virtually everything.
Yeah, everything's on video. I actually fought the NFL in the instant replay for that, but what that does is that when we have video and things like that are dumped out into the public without context, then it leaves it up to the individual to try and figure out what that looks like. Generally, these are use of force things, and force is never pretty. It never looks pretty, and force is a violent thing. So I think context in what we're talking about, it really matters, whether it's the video, whether it's we're talking about reforms, whether we're talking about things. We need to remember that in addition to the context, that we really should be data driven. It's not about what is the narrative, it's about what is the truth. And that's the problem that we have, is that, when we talk about the law of primacy, and the law of primacy is that if you are normally an impartial person, the first credible thing you hear, you tend to believe and to stay with that, with that belief. So when we get these video dumps in out of context, or we get other situations that come without context or anything like that, an average person that doesn't do their own independent digging is going to go, oh, okay, that looks bad. This politician's saying it's bad, so therefore I guess it's bad. And we drive this really severe wedge.
Sure, like the last 10 seconds of an arrest, for instance, without all the lead up or any of the other information. Sure. So, and frankly, we live in a soundbite culture now, right? Or a video bite, or is it quick enough to be on Snapchat or whatever? And that's a lot of the problems that I think. How is that impacting the sort of the mood of law enforcement?
Oh, man.
I mean, because that's the thing is we there's obviously a mood in our general community, but it's not very often we get to hear, okay, you're in law enforcement. What is it? How does this impact you?
It's devastating.
I mean, is it harder to recruit too? And
we've seen agencies, their recruiting has gone down. They're not able to recruit because one of the biggest recruiters for a department are people that currently work in that department. They'll tell their friends or somebody that they served with or somebody in their neighborhood, hey, why don't you come test? Why don't you come test? When I tested for my agency, I was one of like 350. that showed up.
Yeah.
When I retired, they were getting 22 people to apply for
Wow.
4 or 5 spots. And so when you look at needing to fill spots in a bigger, broader pool, you're able to be a little more decisive about what you want, what you want to allow in backgrounds, things like that. You get a higher average of quality. When the pool is down and you have spots that need to be filled, what we're seeing across the country is that agencies are sacrificing quality for quantity
At exactly the wrong time,
at
right? I mean,
exactly the
like
wrong
at the
time.
very moment when we need the quality and those who understand kind of these
Right,
nuances, all of a sudden we're not getting
right.
that very quality.
And so that has an impact. The working environment has an impact. When you're not safe on the street and you're not safe in your own agency, it's a very difficult thing to reconcile.
Yeah.
It places stresses on the home. We're seeing an uptick in separations and divorces. We're seeing an uptick in other stress driven circumstances, and it's just I've never seen anything
Yeah.
like it in 25 years.
Well, it's got to be hard when you're at law enforcement. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who appreciate you and love what you do, but
Absolutely.
there's also those who you just don't know. And I remember a month or two ago, my wife and I were on the phone. She was at Five Guys, getting some burgers, and she goes, "Hey, I'm going to call you back." And so a few minutes later, she called me back. I'm like, "What happened?" She's like, "Well, there's a couple law enforcement guys, the Conwood Heights police officers that were there." And she goes, I didn't want them to pay for their lunch. I was going to pay for
That's
them. I'm
awesome.
like, "That's really cool. Thank you for doing that." And I don't know if, it was, she just said,
That
"Look, I want those guys who are in their uniforms to know that notwithstanding all the crud out there that's being said, there are people like me who actually appreciate what they do."
and that's the silent majority that is starting to wake up, and that gesture right there means more to those guys than getting a plaque from the governor or things like that, because it's not the politicians that we're serving, even though they're the ones that hire us.
Right.
It's
Right.
the community that we're serving, and so that recognition of community is I wish I could put it into words how impactful that is on the well-being and even the job satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, and it's helpful, I think, for people to understand that when difficult things happen in law enforcement, it has an impact on individuals. And I remember actually, I have a good friend who worked with, I think, the equivalent of FOP in Los Angeles, and he was working with a law enforcement officer who earlier in the day had shot someone, and the person had pointed a gun at him, and as he was trained, he then shot.
Right.
And I remember him expressing how angry he was at the guy who'd pointed the gun at the police officer, because he's like, the media is only going to see that. They're not going to see the police officer who's like curled up in a ball in the side of the police car, just sobbing. He's like, no one sees that impact. No one sees, that this guy now, even though he was totally justified, he did the right thing. Everyone would say he did the right thing in the circumstance.
It's
He's got to live with it. Yeah. Context is
context.
everything in these sort of things. You have a wellness initiative
Right.
that I think deals with, what my understanding is what I'm talking about. Tell us about that, and how does that impact, or what are you doing for law enforcement?
So the recognition of PTSD and work-related trauma has really taken center stage the last few years. After a personal bout with it back in 2014, and fighting my way through that and kind of back to normal, we started an initiative that would get officers to therapy, because it was walking through that door of the therapist was one of the hardest things that I've done. Because there's a stigma. It's that you're broken, that you can't
sign
be
of weakness,
fixed. It's a sign of weakness and things like that. And so I was in a good position. I was working undercover at the time. I mean, things were good, and I'm like, I don't want to jeopardize that. So we started a foundation, a 501c3, and where we pay for the first 4 visits for any police officer in the state, whether you're an FOP member or not. If you were willing to go to therapy, we will pick up the tab for those first 4. We'd love to pick up all of them, but funds are limited.
But those first 4 at least get the
But those
ball
first
rolling,
4
right?
in the door, because when I went, it was after the 4th visit, I started looking forward to the next one. You know, the first one was pretty brutal. Second one, I was like, I still don't know. Third one, I starting to see the clouds part, and then by that fourth one, I'm like, this is really working. And so we wanted to extend that to everybody that we could.
Appreciate that, and thanks for doing that, because it's a huge, it's a huge need that it's the other side of the coin that few people need. So a couple of things as we wrap up here.
Sure.
Talk about briefly, what are the reforms? And people talk about police reforms and reforms that are needed. What are some of the things that you're working on in that arena? Because that's clearly a topic of conversation that you're having all the time. What are some of those that you're looking at, or what is it you would like people to know about that fact, and the fact that obviously organizations like yours are in fact trying to help with this issue?
Well, I think one of the bigger things to realize is that cops are not afraid of change. We're not afraid of reform. In fact, we've been calling for some of the very reforms that are coming up, but they need to be prioritized and they need to be evaluated. We're all about the transparency, but for example, probably one of our biggest ones is in regards to officer-involved shootings and the releasing of videos and findings in the case. 10 days after a case closes is not enough time to provide context. And we have district attorneys here in the state, one in particular, who is he'll sit on a shooting review case for, we've got one that is now 28 months. 28 months that he's sitting here saying, well, I don't know.
And so if you're the officer,
if you're the family of the suspect that was shot, it's not fair to them.
It's just unfair to everyone.
It's not fair to anyone, because, and so one of those biggest reforms is, look, if you can charge a triple homicide in a matter of 3 or 4 days, then you can definitely deal with an officer-involved shooting or an officer-involved critical incident within 90 days.
Yeah.
And release everything. Release the videos, release the context, release the reports, release the findings. Give it all. Transparency isn't dropping little nuggets. Transparency is, okay, here's what I have, and it's in a timely fashion, and it's full of context.
It's the context. So just as we wrap up, if you could sort of say one thing to people that's kind of being missed in this debate. I mean, what's the one thing you would want people to take away from our conversation?
Work with us. It's society is not doomed. It's doomed when we give up. And right now, there are so many officers that every day that they put on the uniform are sitting there asking themselves, why should I continue? Why go through another day of this? And that's why things like what your wife did at Five Guys is so impactful, because it's kind of that rejuvenating thing that as we get through this crisis, and we will, that there's a responsibility of anybody that is a stakeholder in this. There's a responsibility to make sure that the outcome is favorable for every stakeholder.
That's great. And I think it's helpful to hear people say things like that, and know that the kinds of reforms that they're talking about are also reforms that you guys are working on, because the bad actors or the problems that we see are things you guys want to fix as well.
Absolutely.
Like, it's not like it's everyone against you guys who want to just maintain the status quo. You guys are working to, you want to see these things work as well.
There is not a cop out there that wants to work with a bad cop. But the frustrating thing is that the reason why it's so hard to get rid of them is because there's no administrative due process for police officers. And so agencies will short circuit the investigation, and then the administrative law judges are saying, we didn't give them due process, so you cut that corner, so they're going to be reinstated.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen guys that should have lost their job that got it back because they didn't have due process and the agency cut corners.
Yeah,
we're all for making sure that the right people are in the job and that the wrong people are out, but the ends can't justify the means.
Well, and I think that to do that, you've got to have agencies as well that are well funded. And so the call to do exactly the opposite right now is exactly, it's exactly the wrong approach at exactly the wrong moment. So, well, anyway, thank you for being here. Thanks for talking about this. We've been with Brent Jex with the Fraternal Order of Police. And it's been a great conversation to kind of get the feel from another side of the coin that we don't always get in this conversation. So thanks for joining us. I'm Derek Brown, chairman of the Utah Republican Party, and we appreciate you being here with us today. And thanks again, Brent.
Thanks.